Hey everyone, it's Chris. Today I'm doing a video on the Fender Acoustasonic Player Telecaster. I have this one in Arctic White. I just wanted to do a kind of more personal video on this guitar, kind of my own thoughts of owning it, as well as just a general review. So maybe something different than other review channels will. They'll talk about the guitar, they'll play it, but actually owning it and kind of learning about the quirks and kind of stuff like that. You might not hear so much about. So I'm just going to go into that, but first I'm just going to talk about the guitar itself and then the differences between the American model. So if you are thinking about getting one, like, hopefully this video will be helpful. But starting with the materials, this whole thing, the body, the back, sides, and neck are mahogany. It has a spruce top, a solid spruce top, and then a rosewood board and a rosewood bridge. That's the exact same on the American model, except for that one has an ebony board and an ebony bridge. So just a difference. That's not really, they're both great woods. So those are the only construction differences. Otherwise, the only differences would be electronics. So the American model has a 5-way switch, and then the player model has a 3-way switch. And there are some differences in tone between those two, which I'll get to in a second. And then this one is powered by a 9-volt on the back. And then the American model is a lithium-ion battery, rechargeable lithium-ion. So one more thing about how it's powered. One of the reasons I actually got this model over the American one, obviously price is a big difference, but is that it's powered by a 9-volt. So say you're on stage, you forgot to, if you had the American one, maybe you forgot to charge it or whatever. Like if you just have a 9-volt, you could just pop it in and then you're good to go for another about 20 hours, it says on their website, for playability. And I think that's pretty accurate in my experience. So, having the ability to just do that, and then you can also buy rechargeable 9-volt batteries, so you could just keep recharging them. Meanwhile, the lithium-ion batteries lose capacity, so over time the guitar will be able to hold less of a charge. And I've done some research before I bought this, and I couldn't find like a good way to replace the battery. And if that's changed, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I couldn't find any good resources on replacing the battery. Maybe you can go through Fender or Fishman to try to get a replacement. And I'm sure there's a way to do it, but otherwise, like a 9-volt, the guitar itself will just stay the same, and you just replace the battery, which is totally good. So now let's just go through a few tones. I'm just going to play through each of the modes. I'll just briefly explain how this works. So at the forward position, this is like the kind of mic'd up acoustic sound, and this is a volume, and this is a blend knob. So at one way fully turned, it's one position, and one way the other, it's another position. So you can get anywhere in between, but if you turn it down at the acoustic position, this is a small body acoustic, so let's just hear how that sounds. Nice. And then the next one is a dreadnought, so this is going to sound fuller, warmer. It won't necessarily have that bright kind of cut as much, but here. So there's the dreadnought. Those both sound fantastic. Next we're going to go into the middle, and this is just the undersaddle piezo. If I turn this down, it's just the straight piezo pickup. So this is going to sound very similar to a lot of live acoustic guitar sounds you hear. So here we go. Really bright, really kind of crisp sounding. I personally really like that sound. Fender calls it the lo-fi sound. So you have this, and then if you turn the blend knob forward, it's the lo-fi crunch. So now this is where it starts to blend the acoustic and electric kind of sounds out of the guitar. So this adds a lot of gain to it. It gets this really huge kind of warm sound and with some gain. So here. It really is like smooth, but it's distorted, but it's got this like, it kind of tames those real high kind of sounds, and it just kind of smooths it over. And it's a really interesting sound that I've never really heard before. So it's kind of cool. You can get this all on the guitar without, I'm not doing anything with pedals or anything. And then flip the switch back, and now you're in electric mode. So let's turn down the knob again. This is just a clean Telecaster. Just using the magnetic pickup, a noiseless pickup designed for this guitar. And then if you turn the blend knob, you'll get some gain. So kind of get a crunch. So it sounds really good. We'll get into kind of what to play through and how, you know, there's a lot of options for this guitar, but those are the tones, and then plugged in, and now I'm just going to go into playing it in the room. So let's just hear that. I'm going to lower my mic a little bit for this. So I'll talk about it in a sec, but here is just unplugged. Here's the mic right here. Okay, so now that we've gone through all the tones, I'm just going to talk about my thoughts. Here's kind of the personal aspect of this video. And I'm going to start with how it sounds unplugged. So this is like a big factor that you don't really hear too much about in other videos. It's mostly like the plugged in sounds. So I'm actually really impressed with how this thing sounds unplugged. So obviously it's not going to have the same projection, the same volume, the same low end as a full-size acoustic. But it's going to sound kind of more similar to like a parlor or a small body, obviously, because it's very thin. But considering how thin and how light this thing is, I mean, it's like, I think it's like, it's got to be like half the weight of like a regular Telecaster or something. Like it's extremely light, like one hand easy. So that's one thing to consider. But also, it's really thin, and they've obviously done a lot of engineering to get it to have this much projection. Like how everything is shaped, the sound hole is very different. I've watched videos on Fender's website about how they talk about how they built it, and it's kind of amazing. So this thing projects surprisingly well for its size. The other thing is it has a really nice like acoustic sound. Like if you were to play something, you know, semi-hollow or hollow body unplugged, it's not gonna sound that great like unplugged, or it's gonna, you know, it's not gonna sound like an acoustic. But this thing, even though it doesn't have necessarily as much projection and bass and all that, it still has like a nice kind of snappy small body acoustic tone. So it sounds pretty nice, and it surprisingly projects well. Like I was just playing with a few friends unplugged. They had like full acoustic guitars, classical guitars, and we're playing, and this thing could like keep up volume wise. Like it's got a lot of top end that kind of cuts through. So it's kind of snappy. It sounds really nice in the room, and you really get used to it. At first it might be like, oh, you know, this is a little like quieter than my acoustic, whatever. But if you're just like playing on the couch, it's definitely loud enough to be like singing with or even playing with people. So it's surprising. It fills up a room. Like this is just a little personal thing, but I was playing on my balcony. I'm on like the third floor. People are walking by, they could hear me just fine. You know, they'd like look up and say hi, whatever. So it's loud enough for that, surprisingly. So that's one really kind of nice thing about the guitar, is playing it unplugged sounds nice. And, you know, if I'm just playing on the couch and singing, it totally works for that. It's really, really kind of cool. So next we're going to talk about playing plugged in, and a little kind of interesting thing I found about volume levels that I've never heard before, I've never seen. I don't think it's just this guitar, but one thing I've noticed is the dynamic range of it is kind of interesting. So if I'm on the acoustic mode, it's extremely sensitive, right? It's the piezo. It's very sensitive to any kind of, it gets real quiet and then it can get really loud, right? So Also, I should mention I have a little bit of reverb on the acoustic. No other effects, it's just a little reverb. So what I'm playing, just a splash of reverb, and yeah. So, but anyway, the plugged in sound for the acoustic stuff is very dynamic, and when you get to the electric, you know, you can still get that quiet stuff, but it starts to level out at some point. Like, it's loud, but it can get loud, but I feel like the max is not as loud as the acoustic. So I think it's all about how you're playing. Like, if you're like fully strumming on the acoustic mode and you go to electric, you might notice a volume difference on a little bit on the top. But if you're playing at like a moderate intensity, and you switch, it should be pretty similar, which is good. It's just two different systems on how it amplifies the sound, and I think they work really well together, but there is some slight differences in the dynamic kind of range of it and how that works. So you can either roll down the volume a bit on the acoustic, go to the electric for a solo or something and roll it up quick, or work with pedals, you know, drive pedals, whatever, or boosts or something like that. So there's a slight, I noticed like a slight discrepancy in volume levels when really like digging in, but otherwise it's pretty consistent. That's one thing I've never heard before, and I should mention, at least in my experience. The other thing is, the American model has a body sensor pickup, so you can kind of do, you know, the tapping stuff on the guitar. But I've actually noticed that this guitar does it pretty well because of the piezo system in here, which the American model also has. But this one, you know, it doesn't have the body sensor, but to me it does like a very similar thing. Like, it really sounds pretty good because it senses the vibrations of the top. So I'm just going to go to... I've noticed that right in the piezo only mode, it's the loudest, and especially with the gain rolled up. But, you know, here, you can hear that. That's not through the mic. You know, you can loop that kind of stuff. It sounds good. So that's another thing I've never really seen much of. You can still do that kind of tapping stuff on the guitar, especially through loops, which is kind of what I'll get to next. Is this thing is awesome for loops. You can totally loop like an acoustic or electric, you know, depending on what you want. You can start with an acoustic thing. You can be playing acoustic, switch to an electric mode, you know, add some overdubs with like maybe the piezo sounds or the lo-fi crunch, get some like nice rhythm stuff in there, or whatever. Like, the sounds are so usable and it sounds great through a loop. So I'm just gonna demo this thing. Now that I've played all the tones, I'm gonna just demo it through a loop. So I'm just gonna, let's see. So, nice progression going. That is with the Dreadnought acoustic. Now I'm going to add a little drum beat on the piezo. So, that's working pretty well. And I'm just going to go for it on the electric. Right? It works pretty well. So I just used all three of the positions at some point in that loop, and you can add so many more overdubs, but the loop really works pretty well. This thing is pretty amazing at that kind of stuff. So, and then obviously playing live, there's a lot of great applications for it, which I've used before. So it's very useful if you're playing, especially like in the same song kind of stuff, where you can just switch between acoustic, electric sounds on a dime. And that leads me to my final point, which is like, what do you play it through? This is another thing I don't hear that much. Like, you play through an acoustic amp? Do you play through an electric amp? Do you play through a PA? And the answer is it's designed to play through all of those, but it does it, it really depends on how much you actually want to use, I guess, the certain aspects of it. So in my experience, it sounds really nice through an electric amp with the electric settings, obviously. Like it has like a great Telecaster kind of tone. The pickup is a little warmer, I think, than a regular Telecaster pickup, and that has to do with probably the acoustic strings and how the pickup is designed for that. But it has the Telecaster kind of snappy tone, but it doesn't have that like kind of more shrill top end like kind of aspect of a Telecaster. So it has a nice warm sound that's actually really nice. So through an electric amp, it sounds real smooth, real kind of big, and then with distortion pedals, it sounds great. So there's that. But the acoustic stuff might sound kind of shrill or like a little bright through an electric amp. If you ever try to play an acoustic through an electric amp, you're going to get a similar sound. But the thing is, you can kind of play with, even like the lo-fi mode, crunch mode, that sounds good through an electric amp. So in the acoustic stuff, if you have a nice clean setting, it's doable. So if you're on stage, you're playing mostly like rock stuff, and then you have like one or two acoustic parts, it's doable for that. Like, it's gonna work well. So I recently played a show where most of the songs are rock. I'm playing the electric mode, and I'm like soloing. It has acoustic strings. You get used to it, the thickness of it. This has 11s on it, so it's a little lighter. So I can still do full bends on all the strings, which is nice. So it worked pretty well. I have a nice kind of low action setup. It worked really well for that, actually. So I'm playing rock music, and then for like 2 or 3 songs, I'd switch to the acoustic and play, a part or whatever, which worked really well. So electric would be great. I think the best overall sound for everything is probably a PA, because the acoustic stuff, that's kind of what you'd be hearing right now. This is just a direct signal in. It has a really clean, crisp sound in the acoustic stuff, right? If I switch, that sounds great. And then the electric stuff still sounds like really good. It's designed for this. That sounds awesome right in. So it's designed to be played through a lot of different systems. And the electric stuff sounds great through a PA. And then if you've ever used like drive pedals right into a PA instead of like an amp, it might sound a little interesting. It's not going to sound. It's going to sound really like harsh and like kind of honky, bitey kind of. Which if you're going for that sound, it's actually pretty cool. So, I sometimes like a lead tone on this thing, playing the electric pickup through a PA, because it has this like crazy sound to it, and it's really kind of cool. But if you're going for the more traditional electric guitar sound, then through an electric amp would be really nice. But with pedals. But otherwise, through a PA without any pedals, you can get a good amount of crunch in here with the blend knob itself. So it's going to sound great with everything through a PA. And then through an acoustic amp, I've also tried that kind of stuff, and the acoustic stuff sounds really warm. The electric sounds even warmer. Like it's gonna sound fine. I haven't with pedals, like you'll still get that kind of bright, kind of honky sound, but it's a little tamed down. So you can make it work through anything. So if you have different systems, you're like, how am I gonna make this work? You can really make it work with anything. The PA is kind of like right in the middle. I think that's like a great place to just be able to play it. You just plug it in and go through a lot of different things. And the loop is just great with this thing. So pedals work with it. Different systems work with it, which is really cool. And this thing is just kind of an everything guitar. I mean, it's pretty insane how I can go on stage, play a gig with any kind of amp. I just played through like a Fender Electric. Everything worked great. The acoustics sounded nice. Like the electric sounded great. I could do that, and then I could just unplug it and just sit on my couch and play and sing along with it. It's got a nice tone. It's made out of really nice material, so it's got a really nice tone. I could be playing in my room. I could, I could be jamming with my roommates, plug into his amp. I could plug into my PA. I could, you know, it's just, it can do so many things, and it's just an everything guitar. So it's kind of amazing to have all these features in one thing, and it be, it's comfortable, it's light, it's fun to play. The neck feels great. It looks great. There's so many great things about this guitar. And I did mention some of the little quirks, so that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, that's kind of my overall thoughts of the Acoustasonic. It's pretty amazing. If you're thinking about it, hopefully this video helped. I'd still recommend, playing one. There's in stores. But I've played both the American and the player one, and I actually really like the player one. The American one is great, and there's a lot of options. But one thing I really like about the player model is, first of all, the battery. Second, it has a 3-way switch, which, if you want a more simplified kind of, this is a complicated guitar, and with the setup can get kind of complicated with what system you're running through pedals. So having a 3-way switch is pretty good. But the other thing is, they didn't just make this like a stripped down version of the American one with like less sounds and everything. They changed the, you have the electric and acoustic, which are similar, but they added this middle mode, the lo-fi mode, where it's just the piezo, and I actually really like the sound of a piezo. Just like a straight piezo pickup, like that kind of live acoustic sound. I think it sounds really nice. So the American one doesn't have that. It has a lot of different options, but this one has this unique thing, and then the lo-fi crunch mode. So it's kind of like half of the sounds you can get are acoustic and half are like kind of like electric. So it really is unique from the American model. So that justifies, maybe I'm spending less money, but I'm getting something different that maybe I like more. And construction-wise, it's very similar. So this thing is pretty amazing. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully that helped.